Just want to wish everyone a good evening. Thank you for being with us. My name is Natalie Rosario Zayas. I am the online programs coordinator for the City Island Nautical Museum. And I am here today with Barbara Dolsensek and Robert Arthur King, and we are going to engage in a conversation about different homes and buildings that are on City Island, the different architectural styles, and the history about these buildings. So I am going to take some time to formally introduce our two speakers tonight, our two panelists. I want to start off by introducing Barbara Dolsensek, who has been living on City Island since 1976. Barbara currently lives in a landmark Queen Anne Shingle Style house, and she's our museum's vice president and administrator, as well as a trustee and officer of the City Island Historical Society. Barbara's had a successful career as a writer and a copywriter, with experience working at the Metropolitan Museum of Art and writing 13 books. As of most currently, she is writing and copy editing for the Island Current. We're also joined here tonight by Robert Arthur King, who also resides right here on City Island. He is a registered architect and a certified interior designer. And he is also an adjunct professor at the New York School of Interior Design, where he has been teaching since 1989. Robert holds a master's degree from the Columbia University School of Architecture, as well as a postgraduate degree from the Architectural Association Graduate School in London. Robert has also been recognized and elevated to the College of Fellows in the American Institute of Architects, which is an honor bestowed upon fewer than 1% of all registered architects. So we are very excited to have both Robert Arthur King and Barbara Dolsensek here with us this evening to talk about notable architecture on City Island. So we're going to give a quick brief overview on City Island and the homes.
Well, as you can see from the map here, there are a great many buildings on City Island. I don't know how many, we didn't count them for this, did we? No. But the next map will show you what it was like in 1848. This is the amount of property that was divided up on City Island, which is facing, it should be facing north-south, but it isn't in this case, with the Horton family, that H section on the right. We're one of the first owners on City Island, so we'll be talking about their building. There were also other people, Orrin Fordham, who started up the oyster business here, and William Schofield, who was a farmer, whose house is still here on the island. Robert, this is up to you now to describe architectural influences.
Well, yeah. Many of the houses are more eclectic than any strict particular style. And some of the styles, which is the next photograph, you have the Cape Cod style house. And that's very much a New England type of house, started in Cape Cod. And many houses then were done based on the environment. And the steep roofs were designed to carry the snow off the roof. Houses were built, again, for storm. And actually, there's been a resurgence of these style houses in the 1930s and 1950s. And it's also an offshoot from the colonial style. Then you have the Italianate style, which is very popular in the 19th century. And more, again, many Italian Renaissance details. And that was really became popular in the 1840s by Alexander Jackson Davis. And the roofs, they're basically flat roofs, extended eaves, corbels, and again, the pitch roofs. The Second Empire style, also known as the Napoleon III style, again is historic style building with many mixtures of different details. And has also different periods. It's somewhat of a mansard roof, and actually, as a footnote, mansard roofs by Joseph Franciscus Mansard in about the early 1700s basically in Paris, you were taxed on the size of your roof. So if you pitched your roof and had less area, you paid less taxes. The Queen Anne style, again, very popular in the 19th century. Again, until the earliest 20th century, it has a mixture of different styles, gable roofs, overhangs, screen porches, pediments, wooden shingles, oriel or bay windows, and usually a garden and a wood fenced garden in the front. Then you have the shingle style, which became popular after the fair of 1876. The shingles, gable roofs or hip roofs were used, more pronounced with more of a horizontal feeling to them. The arts and crafts movement, which was started by Morris in England in the 1870s, and became popular in the US from the 1820 to the 1920s. And it became really 1910 to 1925, it was very popular between the Art Nouveau and the Art Deco period of time. And it was an offshoot of the reaction from the Industrial Revolution, where people wanted more showing of the different crafts that people could perform. An American Craftsman style, which is very similar to the arts and crafts movement, with the accentuating the horizontal style, pitch roofs, and again, arts and crafts, very much so.
We spoke about the styles of houses. You won't see any perfect style of any of these right here, because most of the City Island houses were built by the owners or by local contractors, so that they did not come from the famous architects of the period. This building on the left is called, was built in 1820 by George Washington Horton, who moved to City Island, bought about 42 acres at the southern end of the island. You know, Horton Street, Rochelle Street was named for his son, Rochelle Horton, and they were a very important family. He was the head of roads and bridges for Pelham. City Island was part of Pelham at this time and remained so until 1895. The interesting thing about the Horton Homestead is not only that he built it himself, but that it was turned and moved on the property when they widened City Island Avenue in around 1908 or so. And it is still in existence. The picture on the right, if you walk down Belden Street and look back up at the Lobster Box restaurant, you will see the same original Horton house. There it is. It's been tampered with on the exterior, but according to relatives of the Duriers who owned the property for years, it is absolutely like the original. It's absolutely fabulous. So 1820.
Yeah, you can see a cross between the Cape Cod and colonial style house.
Yes, good point. In the 1850s, this I mentioned William Schofield before. He was a farmer, and this although they call it Schofield Street, it's named for him, but they stuck an H in it for some reason. But at any rate, he was a farmer, and he and his brother owned a great deal of property on City Island. And this is a recently landmarked house. It was not in very good condition for many years. Lauren, you can move to the next. You'll see that on the left is a photograph that was taken. I'm sure anybody who owns property on City Island has tried to look for the New York photographs taken by the city of New York between 1939 and 1941.
Part of the WPA program.
That's right, that's right. And so they photographed all these houses with the block and lot number clearly visible in the photograph. And you can see the Schofield house on the left. It looks quite different from the way it looks today in this photograph taken from the same angle. it underwent a good deal of refurbishment before it became a landmark, although the owners who did the work on it actually worked with the Landmarks Commission. And so that everything was done appropriately and according to style. The next picture will show you what happened. The original look of it was on the top photograph there. The family decided to move it on the property, so they rolled it on steel rollers and moved it a certain distance sort of west and south, and in order to put in a garage on the property and so forth. But they kept the house intact. They took all the decorative elements off, and then, as you'll see in the next picture, they put them all back on again. And whoops. Well, again, as you saw in that first picture, right? Yeah, it really looks pretty terrific. In 1850, right around the same time as the Schofields were living here, this is a little house that's on the corner of Tier Street and City Island Avenue. And it was the first church on City Island. The Methodists, the Baptists, and the Episcopalians shared it. And when the Episcopal minister went down south to work at a church down there related to the Bolton family, when he came back to City Island, the Baptists and the Methodists wouldn't let him back in. So that's when Grace Church was built. And then ultimately the Methodist Church, Trinity Church, was built almost right next door to this little building, which is now a private house. And Grace Church was built when the Episcopal priest came back from the south. It was built by the Bolton family. And inside it is one of the most valuable works of art, I think, on City Island, which is the stained glass window. The Bolton family lived in Pelham, and they were very famous as stained glass makers long before Tiffany made his name. But this is, what would you call this, Robert? Gothic, American Gothic?
Probably, judging from the window.
It was built by this shipmaker, a shipbuilder who down the street on Pilot Street. And he was also the one who made the first bridge on City Island, the wooden bridge. But this was built, and inside there are ships at the altar, one facing east and one facing west. It's a lovely church, and it's on the National Register now because they recognize that it was an important thing to maintain. This is Italianate.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Italianate.
Yeah,
A cross of Italianate about the high part.
right.
Yes.
It's a cute, tiny little house on Carroll Street, which you could almost not even notice as you drove by. It is, they think, really, it was originally lived in by Horton and Lowndes and all kinds of families that lived here on the island a long time ago. Carroll Street is really in the center of City Island, and so that was one of the populated areas. And the Landmarks Commission was very interested in landmarking this house, but that hasn't happened yet. I'm hoping that we're going to do some more research on it and see if we can convince the owner. You're working on this house. This is the one.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes, with the ice cream parlor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, right. This is next to Lickety Split.
Yes.
For years, it was owned by a man named Gerald Ford, who was not president of the United States, but he was a very important ships broker. And it is now bright red or orange red, would you call it? Yeah. But it was originally a white house, and it was built very early on by the Cochran family, which owned that entire lot. They also owned what is now Hawkins Park, and which was the family cemetery. Luckily, they moved everybody before the Parks Department took over the lot.
I notice most of the houses aren't in particular strict style, cross between colonial and Cape Cod.
Yeah. Now, this is pretty much
Yes.
Second
It's
Empire.
about
Is that-
Second Empire, yes.
Talk about what's Second Empire on this one. Yeah.
The
Is that the mansard roof?
the mansard roof, I guess the detail of the balcony in the front
Mhm.
would be it. Just some of the details. It's not a strict Second Empire, but you'll notice some of the details on the building are Second Empire.
Interestingly, that there,
Dormer windows as well.
yeah, the 2 or 3 doors down, Cormac McHenry's office house is very much smaller than this, but it looks exactly like it. It's got the same details, and there are houses on Schofield Street that are also very similar to this.
Style.
Yeah, exactly. This is what it looked like on the left in 1940 for the city photograph, and compared to what it looks like now, it looks better.
Yes.
Yes.
Right? I mean, it's in color now.
Yeah, right.
That's certainly helped. Now, it was built by Samuel Pell, who was an oysterman and who was an important family. This is a curious house. It's very similar looking.
Very similar. Yeah, Second Empire.
It's on Miniford, though. It's not facing City Island Avenue. Although the rumor, the family or the legend is that it was originally next door to the Pell house, facing City Island Avenue, which is where all the big houses were. The
Yeah.
minute the bridge was built, people started building these nice big fancy houses. And apparently was a falling out between the two families. So they just picked it up and they moved it over to Miniford and turned it around. It's called the Captain's Manor now, and somebody had spent a lot of money fixing it up, so it really looks pretty nice.
It's very much
It's very nice gardens. too.
Second Empire style.
Yeah.
Yeah, indeed. We don't know who the captain was, though. This was City Island's first designated landmark, and it's also on the National Register. It's a cottage style. There's a book by Andrew Jackson Downing, who was one of the famous architects who did drawings of certain styles that were borrowed a lot by builders. And this house is definitely a Victorian cottage. It's charming. It's at the very end of Belden Street, down at the south end of the island. If you go past the Lobster Box and you go all the way to the end, it's right at the end there. It's a very charming house, and it's been lived in by a family that's taken very good care of it for years.
Your Downing lived up until 1852, died at the age of 37, but he's the one that made Italianate design very popular in the US.
This house was built toward the end of the 19th century. Frederick Goss, who was an important individual on City Island with a fair amount of money, but a very important job working with boatyards. And he had an architect from Bridgeport, Connecticut, of no particular fame, named Banks. And I tried to Google him and it came up with all these banks. So that didn't do any good at all. But in any event, the interesting thing about this house is that the family that owns it did a restoration of it. And unlike many other restorations or remodeling, I call it, this actually looks exactly the way it originally looked. They looked at they have the original architect's drawings at their house, and so they really looked at it carefully. But in using some of the materials, they used it's right on the water. So they used materials that would hold up in storms and with salt water spray and stuff. So very clever, very pretty house.
Yes.
This house is mostly interesting because of its history. It's at the southeast corner of Marine Street and City Island Avenue, with a very pretty sign saying "dead end" right in front of it. But in any event, it was a very important building. It was, as I say, built in the 1890s. But it was originally used as a telegraph station and an office really for sending Hellgate pilots out to help boats move from Long Island Sound down the East River down to New York Harbor. And the pilots, were sent out by the office in that house, which originally had a, what do you call those things on top? You'll see it. We'll get to another picture. In any event, show the next ones and on the left, you can see the observatory on the top, right. And that was when it was a station. I think it was also a shop. Then in 1895, when City Island became voted to become part of New York City, it suddenly became the Northeast Bronx Community Center. So the building was transformed. And then in the 1920s, it became a restaurant. And if you look carefully at that photograph, you can see that it says restaurant. And I believe it was probably a pretty busy bar during Prohibition. Most restaurants on City Island learned to take the liquor signs down. Got into trouble, but never mind, it was the same house, yeah. And then the next house, this is interesting because this house is the one next door. And it looks exactly the same. So do you think it was the same builder?
Probably.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, they would have done that.
Same
Now
sort of
people
plan.
build houses in threes, don't
Yeah.
they, on City Island?
Yeah.
But so that's really what this house might have originally looked like with that observatory on the top. This is where we're sitting
Right now, right.
Yeah, City Island, when it became part of the city, the Board of Education said, oh, good, we'll build you a school. Well, of course, it was the third school on City Island. The first school was down near where PS 175 is now. The second school was in Hawkins Park. That building later became a police station. And then it was taken away. Part of it actually is a private house on Center Street, but it became a park. So PS originally 103 and then PS 17 was built, and it was built by a famous
C.P.H. Gilbert, who was the superintendent of school.
Yeah, he was, yes.
Superintendent of schools, and he's
Right.
the one that made famous the H plan, which you'll find throughout New York with a playground on both sides. And the schools were also located in the middle of the block.
Yeah.
They didn't want them on the corner because of children. But he
Huh.
was very famous
Yeah,
architect in
that's interesting.
schools.
It is on the National Register. It's also a landmark. And unfortunately, it was always red brick. And then when it was sold by the city, the new school, PS 175, was built in 1975. And so this was no longer used as a school, and it became a community center, really. And then the city decided to sell it. So they did to a developer who turned it into a condominium. But with the proviso that the City Island Nautical Museum remain on the main floor and the community center in the basement. And so we're still here. But it's now white, so it doesn't look exactly the way it used to.
That's the skyscraper on City Island.
Yes.
It's the tallest building on the island.
Yeah,
But
but it's very charming. It's very Victorian looking, isn't it?
Yes.
Yeah. It's privately owned. It is not used. It was originally, it was at Gilbert's Pharmacy. There were a lot of stores. In the old days, there were actually 4 pharmacies on City Island Avenue, right in this area. But not so much anymore. But anyway, now it's private. It's a
Yes.
private home, yeah, which is very nice.
My grandfather built that.
Mhm.
My grandfather built that.
So the
You
school.
built it?
Yeah, he
No
was the one who
kidding.
or he didn't build it, he had it
It's the
built.
last.
He had it,
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
I'm aware of that.
This is at the south, no, sorry, it's at the west end of Tier Street, overlooking Eastchester Bay. And it was built by a man named Larry Delmore, who was second in command at of the Tammany Hall, which really ran the city in those days. And he was known as Whisperin' Larry because he didn't speak above a
Sounded
whisper.
awful.
They're not sure he could read or write either, but he was very important. His wife was a real estate dealer though, and she was great. She's the one who bought this property and built the house, which looks very much the same as it did. If you look carefully at the photograph from the city, you can see that there's a porte cochere coming off the porch. And that was used when you drove your horse and buggy in to the property. You could stop under there and people could get out without getting wet. It went away when we bought the house in 1977. The porte cochere was long gone at that point. So we get wet when we get out. And this is a postcard that was done in about 1908,
Look at this one.
which shows one of the most charming parts about the whole place, which is that gazebo that sits on the seawall, which is still here. And at some point, I guess I'll paint stripes on it. But not anytime soon. Samuel Booth was the man who built Dillmore's Point. He also built this house and lived in it himself. And he was very much involved with the Queen Anne Shingle Style. He actually served in the Civil War and then came back to City Island and built a number of houses. Judy Rao lives in one on Center Street, and this one across the street, which he also built. And I think there are probably several more houses on City Island that I haven't found yet.
See, a style like that house, it's really hard to pin down which particular style it is.
Yeah,
Because it's a combination of a little bit of Cape Cod, a little bit of this and a little bit of that.
Landmarks wanted to designate it, but the owner didn't want to designate it, because what they don't tell you when they designate a house is that they take over the whole property. So that you can't do anything on the property
Without their
without
permission.
getting permission. And I didn't realize this till after I got my house landmarked.
You're missing the wrong ear. It's probably the wrong ear. That's better.
This is,
Silent ear.
Was a question?
Grab shanty.
Okay, on the other corner of Tier Street, that was originally a livery stable, and then it became a silent movie theater. And then for years it was a post office, and now it's the crab shanty. So it's like that house on Marine Street. You know, it's just, you don't tear something down, you just
reuse it, right.
repurpose it.
Repurpose, yes.
Yeah.
It's had many transformations.
Yes, right. The reason it went out of business as a silent movie theater was because the building that is now has our supermarket
Became a movie theater.
was a movie theater, yes. Raymond's movie theater, yeah.
Yes.
95 Pell Place.
Yes. This is Captain Stafford lived here. This was ordered from a Sears Roebuck catalog. You can, I've got a photograph of the page from the catalog in 1930, and this was called the Osborne. And what you would do is it cost about $2,500, maybe a little more, and you would order it online. Sears Roebuck, that's what it was famous for, right in Chicago?
Right, yeah.
And then they would
Sears
ship it to your house, and I guess local contractors would
Build it, yeah.
build it, yeah.
You see, it's very much in the American arts and crafts style.
Right, exactly. It's a very charming house, and there are many Sears Roebuck houses on City Island, apparently. I hadn't realized that, but a friend of mine who was interested in these, Ken Binder, said that he can pick out several of them all over City Island. And the next picture will show that on Horton Street, those two buildings that you can see there are both originally Sears Roebuck catalog houses. Yeah. They were not expensive. They were well built.
Yes.
A little small, but
Yeah.
you know. We talked about how well the house on Horton Street was restored. This is one of the more interesting historic houses on City Island. On the left, you can see it as it looked in 1940, but it was around many years before that, where it was known as Levinus Hall. Levinus family was very prominent on City Island. Joshua Levinus at the turn of the century was one of the oyster pirates who used to go over to Long Island Sound and go to Oyster Bay and steal their oysters. Anyway, huge numbers of articles in the New York Times about it. But in any case, Levinus Hall was next to a building that was a restaurant. And so he decided to make Levinus Hall also a restaurant to compete with that one. And it was a sail making. Tom Nye told me that originally there was a sail loft in the building. It has a very interesting history. Now it is owned by two people who can't decide what they want the building to look like. I mean, they clearly have two entirely different
Color, right down the middle. Yeah.
right. So in any case, it does stand out. It's always been a remarkable place and it continues to be.
Okay.
So I know we went through a lot of homes and buildings we wanted to share. So now we would want to either jump into some of the questions in the chat or some conversational guides here. What do we have in the chat, Lauren?
My brother-in-law. My brother-in-law in the corner.
Go with it, yeah.
Does anyone have any questions?
If not, I think it might be beneficial because I know we've touched on landmark homes and things like that. Maybe discussing a little bit about the purpose and benefits to landmarking a home in a building, because I know you briefly touched, Barbara, on
Yeah.
some homeowners being a little bit apprehensive about that. So maybe we can shed a little bit more light on like, what is the purpose to landmarking? Are there any benefits to doing that to a home or a building?
The benefit I would feel is restoring American history. That's the benefit. The downside is the regulations. One, I've worked with a number of landmarks and filed with landmarks, and as long as you comply with their regulations, and there are certain conditions they will exempt and will let go. I think but it preserves the area and the neighborhood.
It maintains the integrity of
And
the
the character
building.
of the space also, and the streetscape
Okay,
as well.
It's worth noting that the month of May is National Historic Preservation Month. So, you know, as I say, I've got a landmark house. I did it because I was, you know, afraid that my son would perhaps ultimately tear it down and make it into condos. I had no idea. He said, of course, he never would, so I'm sure he wouldn't have. But in any event, it was an important house at the time, and it just felt obligated to sort of help to keep it that way, to restore it
yeah,
and to make it look the way it had looked originally. And I believe, and a lot of people on City Island, there are 2 or 3 people I know right now, young couples that have moved here that are spending an enormous amount of time, not to say money, on and work, I mean, research on making their houses look the way they did when they were first built. I mean, it's very important.
yeah.
City Island's got a great history, lots of interesting families have lived here. There are some people that are so interrelated. You go to Pell Cemetery, it's absolutely fascinating. But to know that they all lived here in these houses and that the houses have stayed
Mhm.
the way they were is really,
And the difference between
Yeah.
clam diggers and
muscle suckers.
muckle suckers, which are the two
Right.
groups of people who live on City Island.
Yeah,
Like, we've been here 7 years, and one of the things I find is the charm of City Island. It's a very charming place
Yeah.
to walk down and very safe. I think about 4,300 people live on the island.
yeah, I think that's about that.
Yeah.
The, what's interesting is that somebody's talked to the Landmarks Preservation Commission and said, please go and look at City Island as a historic district, which they can do. Parts of Douglaston, for example,
Mhm.
parts of Brooklyn have been labeled historic districts. And there, people within those districts can't make changes without, again, getting
Google
permits.
landmarks.
But they came to City Island and they looked around at the architecture here, which varies considerably, and they said, no, it was too diverse.
Hmm.
And we all went, yay.
Well, that actually is the charm of City Island, the
Yes.
diversity.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's exactly right, yeah.
I think maybe another charm is the combination of the different styles.
Yeah,
I know
right.
you also mentioned that, Robert. So maybe if you can speak a little bit about what that was all about, why there's such a combination of styles.
The different periods in which they were built, the builders themselves,
Yeah,
and people's taste. And those are and that's what makes City Island charming, is that there's a variety. I mean, variety is the staff of life.
yes.
Yeah.
I have 2 questions from the audience.
Yeah.
Does anyone know where the old home records are now?
Old home wreckers.
Home records, like records of these homes.
Oh.
And how often are the archives updated? Are the updates of these homes officially documented under the address?
No, we have here in the museum, there are some documents indicating who owned property at certain times, quite early on, probably in the late 19th century. But it's a very uneven record. So you can't just go to some resource and find out about all of them. I've done lots of homework on this. I've written a series of articles for the Island Current, and I plan to continue it until I run out of houses or energy, more likely the energy. And you have to dig pretty deeply to find a lot of the history. Into the personalities, the Horton family, for example. There were Hortons living all over this island for many years. They had, about 20 years ago, they had a family reunion here. All these Hortons came back to City Island. It was all very exciting. But there are numerous other families too here that built houses. An interesting thing happened here in around 1900 when the August Belmont Jr., not the one who was the horse racer for whom Belmont racetrack is named, but his son was in the transportation business, and he decided that he wanted to build a subway in Manhattan. And he couldn't do it without an existing franchise for a subway or a taxi or whatever. So he came to City Island, and there was a taxi service, a horse-drawn buggy that ran from Bartow Station in Pelham Bay Park to City Island, all the way down to the end of the bridge. And he bought the franchise from him, from Judge Carey's father, actually, Judge Carey, who was a member of Tammany Hall, of course. And he built his subway. But he liked City Island. He thought it was pretty interesting. So he is the one that was behind the monorail that was built here from Bartow Station to the bridge. Disaster, complete disaster. But it was a very interesting thing. It was the first monorail in this area. What he also did was to buy up property all over City Island. He ended up owning hundreds of acres of City Island. And he wanted to make it into a yachtsman's enclave, like Tuxedo Park is a very special community. He wanted to do that here. Of course, City Islanders, being smart, the prices went up disastrously for him quite quickly. And so he ended up owning a lot of property, which he couldn't do anything with. And he did build roads. Reville Street and not Reville Street, Reynolds Street and went actually between Center Street and what I guess Pell, no, against Pilot Street. All of those streets didn't exist. Those were farms, those were orchards. And so Belmont owned all of that property. And then he died in 1924, and the following year they auctioned off all of those properties, and they've broken everything into lots. And so many buildings. You look at all of the houses that are built on those lots, and they're all brick, mostly brick, because in the 1920s everybody was afraid of fire.
Yes, right. Unfortunately, there is no single archive of City Island.
Yeah,
It's unfortunate.
I mean, for many of the earlier documents are in Westchester County or Pelham. And then after 1895, you know, it's supposedly in the buildings department, but you've been to the buildings department more than you'd like to think, right? It's very hard to find stuff.
All right, we have John Muir. Are you there, John? I'm gonna unmute you.
Hi, John. That's my brother-in-law.
Oh, is it?
Yes.
John, are you there to ask your question? I see your hand is raised.
You have to
Can
unmute.
be heard?
There you go.
Got it.
Ask your question.
I'd like to ask
There you
if
go.
there's any sentiment towards a landmark district designation for the island. That would be unique, not only unique in New York, but under any landmark legislation that I know of anywhere in the country. Is there a whole island that is of a piece and has architectural integrity and a high level of preservation? And I think you'd make a very good candidate for that kind of designation rather than house by house.
We tried that, but the Landmarks Commission felt that City Island was too diverse. There were too many modern buildings, too many buildings without style, so to speak, too many. Too much of a mixture. Of course, that's what makes it so interesting. Maybe they'll change their minds. It would be interesting to see. There was a book that was published by the Bronx County Historical Society some years ago called Landmarks of the Bronx. And there are well over 100 buildings in the Bronx, but many of them on City Island. And so I know that Landmarks Commission is interested. Many people are reluctant to be designated because you have to go to them for, as Robert said, you have to go to them for permits to do everything like change the shape of your driveway. And a lot of people don't like to have to go through that sort of thing. We do have special district zoning here, which keeps buildings of a certain height not helped by the recent flooding where you have to now build.
So
if you're
many
building
feet
a new
above,
house,
yes.
yeah.
There's flood zone.
But it is, but we can't build houses higher than 35 feet in most parts of the, and only single or two-family houses, but not attached housing anymore. So the special district zoning has been very important to us since the 70s. The idea is to retain some of the, what you find interesting about City Island is to retain the maritime atmosphere, the history, and the very special nature that this island has, and we hope to keep it that way.
Okay, we have another
If
question.
anybody, may I add that if any member, any resident of the island wants to start a movement to pressure the Landmarks Commission into considering a historic district designation, I will contribute. And I would like to have, in exchange for my contribution, a bumper sticker that gives that message.
Great, design a bumper sticker, we'll all put it on our car. Great.
Thank you, John.
Carry on.
Okay, next, Mary, I see you have your hand up. I'm seeing if you're around to ask your question. Mary, are you there? Okay,
We're here,
great.
Charlie and I.
Yeah. Hi, everybody. So, Barbara, you mentioned that, that when you went to landmark your house, you got some surprises that were pretty unpleasant.
I got
And
Right.
you got some surprises
yeah,
about the way they managed it that were pretty unpleasant.
not
and-
very unpleasant, it was not expected, let's just say.
I see. Well, so 95 Pell Place, when they approached us about that, we were initially very much in favor of the idea because we at our own expense have maintained it exactly as it was.
And
even
you've
to the
done
wooden-
such a fabulous job, I
Well, the
mean,
wooden storm windows, everything are the same. And, that's, that's, to my way of thinking, was just a practical decision. It's very easy to do for us and was never a question. But the Landmarks Commission came at us in a way that was really unpleasant. They started telling us, well, we're going to do this, we're going to do that. And it put us off altogether, right? And they never, they offered, they said, well, they didn't say we're going to meet with you at your house and have coffee with you at your house. They said, we're going to have a meeting downtown. You can join us if you want to, right? It was just an awful experience dealing with those people. And, there's really no incentive when you think about it. When you're a property owner, as I said before, we're committed to maintaining it exactly as it was. And that's not going to change. But, what does a property owner gain? They don't give you anything in return. And when you go to sell that, you have to tell them it's been landmarked, and you might not be able to repave your driveway the way you want to because these guys will, or you might not be able to put in more efficient windows because these guys will tell you what you can do. So I think in order to make landmarking more popular for homeowners and for business owners, you know, somebody has to talk some sense into those people, because they just never put anything on the table that made us slightly inclined. The only inclination we had was from seeing other people that had done it like you and thinking, well, that's a great commitment. You know, that really felt good. And we were thinking about it, but then we ran into all this stuff with these people. So anyways, that's my 2
Yeah,
cents.
no,
And I think other people have had that experience.
Yeah, Charlie, I completely understand your point of view, and the same thing happened with the Samuel Booth house that's on Center Street.
Yeah.
Wanted to designate that, and the owner resisted because he didn't want, you know, to lose control in a sense.
That was right at the same time as us. I remember
Yes,
that.
exactly,
Yeah, it's Wes,
exactly, and they somehow could waft in and be rude about it. That surprised me totally. They've always been fine with me, actually. I did.
Mhm.
I had a shed out back, an old shed which fell down or fell apart. So I wanted a new one, and that's when I realized I had to go to the Landmarks Commission to get their permission. And I had to run drawings by them and the rest of it, but they were very understanding, and it worked fine. They completely understood. I didn't have any problem, you know, changing the driveway somewhat. So they're reasonable. I think it depends on who you're dealing with there, maybe.
Yeah, I guess so.
Yeah, maybe.
You're absolutely right. They tried to run roughshod over you, as I recall, and it wasn't fair.
Yeah, well, so the door isn't totally closed for us for all time, but we're going to really go at it very carefully if we go back in that direction.
But I remember you saying you didn't want to be landmark because you might want to paint the house bright pink.
Well, that was me.
Yes.
Yeah, that was me talking. You're absolutely right, but I never would do that.
One of the things I find about landmarks is who you get as an examiner at landmarks. That makes a difference.
Yeah.
I think if landmarks gave more incentive, for example, if you had a tax break, if they offered some kind of
Absolutely.
interest loans, then people would be more interested in becoming a landmark.
I think you're absolutely right. And, like some kind of incentive to offset the potential that somehow your property value will be reduced.
Yeah.
It's sort of like if you have a large property in the country and you take what they call a conservation easement, you give up a lot when you do that.
Yeah.
That you give up a lot, you know? Yeah.
Person, yeah.
Anyways, thanks.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your house.
Yes.
I love it. It's my favorite on my walking tours. It's always a star.
Yes.
Well, it's a great house if we're in there and you're bringing people by, just knock on the door. We'll let them look around.
Yeah, well, it depends on the people, but yeah.
Yeah, that's true. That's true.
There's one more, I guess, sort of question about so we went through a lot of residential places. Can you talk a little bit more about the commercial development and if there's any notable architecture on commercial aside from the Lobster Box that was originally?
Right.
The Harlem Yacht Club, I think, would be unique. That's kind of a unique kind of building.
It's the third one. It's burned down twice.
Yeah, right.
But parts of it were part of Artie's restaurant.
Yeah.
It's all,
Yeah.
it's changing, like the crab shanty.
Yeah,
you
right.
know. It's been one thing and then it
Right,
becomes
exactly.
something else again, yeah. Like the skyscraper, do you know when it was built, Lauren?
I don't know.
No, do you have any family records on that?
I'll ask my dad because I'm gonna ask
Dude,
him after this.
Right.
Yeah. Because there's another, I'm gonna do a series now of 4 about which I don't have an enormous amount of information. One of them is the building that's a private house now, but it used to be the North Wind Museum. But before that, it was a workout place that Dr. Sander had an exercise place there where people could train for marathons and stuff. And before that, it was a boarding house. And then before that, it was a private house. I mean, it's one of these places that
Reuse.
reuse.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, right, exactly. It's fun.
I don't see a question here, but I know when we were originally talking, there's always this rumor about the homes from Orchard Beach being removed from Orchard Beach. Is there any truth to that or any
you remember Harry the Button King was Harry Chernoff, who was a dry cleaner on City Island. He told me years ago that he remembered people coming over. Robert Moses kicked them out of Orchard Beach. And he remembers seeing people dragging carts with their cabins. They were more than just tents in those days, and bringing them onto City Island. And also from High Island, because there were lots of cottages and tents there that were moved. And I think, you know, where Terrace Street is now, I think those small houses all came originally from High Island. But I don't know. There's not a lot of documentation of that.
All right. Any final questions? Anyone want to raise their hand or anything in the chat? I see the Kaleidoscope Gallery building used to be a 2-story building that was lifted to put the store space in, says Bill Rainford.
What did Bill say? That
The Kaleidoscope Gallery building used to be a 2-story building that was lifted to put the store space in it.
yeah. What was interesting for some of these old buildings is that one of the first things that New York City wanted to do for City Island, other than build this building as a school, to do a firehouse, to get a new bridge our former bridge, was also to widen City Island Avenue. And so they did a study. We've got a wonderful map here that shows what they were going to do. They were going to expand King Avenue to go all the way down and become Shore Road on the east side of the island. I mean, they couldn't do it because it was too wet. It was called City Island Harbor. It was in the way. But they did widen the streets, and so a lot of the buildings had to be moved or porches taken off,
Yes.
and things changed in order to even get a sidewalk of any kind. And I know Grace Church ended up suing the city because when they had to move, there was some damage and stuff, and I think they got $12,000, which in 1912 wasn't
That
bad.
was-
Yeah. So I think there were a lot of changes there were made, especially in the center part.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do we have any other questions? If not, we want to thank everybody for taking time out of your very busy schedules to sit with us this evening. We do want to let you know that there will be another webinar on May 15th, Boatyards Past and Present. There will be more information about that on all our social media accounts. So you can find us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube under City Island Nautical Museum. And you can just reach out to us there or via email in case you have any questions or any comments. We're not open right now, but you can visit our website and find out when we will be opening, visit our gift shop, and find out where you can reach out to us. But thank you guys so much. We also want to thank the New York City Cultural Affairs Department for their support in allowing us to put on these webinars for you guys. So thank you to them, and thank you to all of you for being here with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
Appreciate
It was
it.
fun.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you, everyone.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Thank you.
You're able to find this recorded webinar on our YouTube. So again, you can just visit our website. There will be a link to that there, and there will be more information on more future webinars and events. So thank you all.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, bye.
That's Rachel. I'm assuming you know her.
Who?
Rachel King.
Oh, that's my granddaughter.
Yeah.
No, I said no to the whole family.
That's good.
She came to support you.
Bye, Rachel.